He was just a single dad working in a dusty garage. Until one quiet afternoon, a stranger walked in speaking French and everything changed. But what he didn't know was who had been listening. Before we dive into this unforgettable story about kindness, second chances, and the road back to believing in yourself, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story that might just change the way you see the world. Now, let's begin. Single dad spoke fluent French to help a customer. He didn't know. The billionaire was right behind. The Colorado sky was already turning to ash gray when Luke Mitchell unlocked the rusty gate to Crawford Auto Lot. Morning chill clung to the air like a stubborn ghost, and the gravel crunched beneath his boots with the rhythm of routine. His hands were rough, calloused hands that once held books and chalk, now held wrenches and oil rags. But today they trembled slightly as he fished out the keys to the office. The smell of grease and old rubber filled the lot like a second skin, but Luke found comfort in it. It was predictable, honest, nothing like the life he'd left behind. He checked the service board, 3 scheduled oil changes, 1 engine diagnostic, and no promise of anything more exciting. Then he looked up and saw the car. It didn't belong. A sleek black Peugeot 504 parked neatly near the fence. Dust clung to its chrome trim, but the body was immaculate, too immaculate for this neighborhood. The type of car that whispered history in French and didn't ask for attention because it demanded it. And next to it, a woman. She wore a tan trench coat, cinched at the waist, her dark hair pulled back in a low twist. Her eyes, though she kept them shielded behind sunglasses, tracked every movement around the lot with quiet precision. Luke felt a twinge of curiosity but moved on. Rich folks came through sometimes. Most didn't stay long. But what stopped him wasn't her. It was the man standing awkwardly near the front desk inside the office, a man flipping through papers, clearly lost and increasingly frustrated. His accent was thick. French. Pardon, the man muttered to the receptionist, a high school intern named Tyler who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Je cherche un véhicule d'occasion, mais je ne comprends pas. His voice cracked with effort. Tyler looked up, panic already blooming in his eyes. Sir, I don't know what you're saying. Like Google Translate? Luke walked in, wiping his hands on a rag, and then, without thinking, spoke. Il cherche une voiture d'occasion, he said, his voice calm, fluent. Peut-être je peux aider. The man turned, startled. Ah, vous parlez français? Mon Dieu merci, Luke gave a half smile. Un petit peu, he lied modestly. In truth, French had once been his world. Before grief. Before Emma. Before life had demanded he trade poetry for power tools. He stepped forward and began translating, helping the man find a reliable sedan in his price range, explaining mileage maintenance, and the kind of things that matter when you're buying your first car in a foreign land. For 10 minutes the lot was alive with a language Luke hadn't spoken in years, and yet it poured from him like it had been waiting in the wings all this time. The Frenchman, Henri, a retired teacher relocating to America to be near his grandchildren, thanked him profusely. You are a very kind man, he said in halting English. Most would not help. Luke shrugged. Most haven't been lost in a new place with no one listening. Behind him, he didn't see her shift. The woman near the Peugeot hadn't left. In fact, she had moved closer, close enough to hear everything. She leaned slightly against the hood of her car, arms crossed, unreadable. Luke turned as Henri walked off to finalize paperwork, and their eyes met. She took off her sunglasses. Her gaze was piercing, not cold, but discerning, like she saw more than he meant to reveal. That was beautiful, she said softly. Luke blinked. The car, the way you spoke. French, right? He hesitated. Yeah, I used to teach it. Long time ago. She stepped forward, holding his eyes. Most people forget things they don't use. You didn't forget. He didn't know how to respond to that. Something about her tone felt less like a compliment and more like recognition. I'm Isabel, she said, extending a hand. Luke. He shook it, Her grip was firm. She looked back at the Peugeot. Needs a tune-up. It belonged to my father. Thought I'd finally get it looked at. You drove that here? He asked, eyebrows rising. That's not a casual car. She smiled faintly. No, it's not. Neither was he. Luke walked around the car, fingers brushing along the fender. French engine. You won't find many who know how to handle this anymore. You do? She asked. I can try, he said. I've fixed worse. You leave it here or I can wait. I cleared the morning. He paused, measuring her. She didn't look like she came from this town. Didn't act like it either. But there was no condescension in her eyes. Just curiosity. He nodded toward the bay. I'll pull it in. As he opened the garage door and guided the car inside, Emma arrived at the lot on her bike, her backpack bouncing. Hi, Dad, she called. Luke waved. Stay clear of the tools, Peanut. She rolled her eyes like any 9-year-old would. I know. Isabel watched her, something softening in her face. Your daughter, Emma. She reads better than I did at her age. Smarter, too. I believe it. Isabel glanced around. This place, it's not what I expected. Most things aren't, Luke said, crouching to examine the undercarriage, and then, just as he pulled off the oil cap, he heard her say quietly, You helped that man. Like it was second nature. Do you ever miss it? Teaching. He froze. That question hit deeper than she could have known. Luke stood slowly, wiping his hands. Every single day. She didn't push, she just nodded. Some things are worth remembering. Their eyes met again. In that moment, the garage wasn't just a garage, it was a place where the past knocked on the door of the present and waited to be let in. And somewhere behind her calm, measured demeanor, Isabel knew she had found exactly what she came looking for. She just hadn't expected it to speak French. The sun had climbed higher by the time Luke slid the jack under the Peugeot. It creaked a little under the weight, the old French frame resisting movement like a stubborn ghost of the past. Just like its owner. From where Isabel stood near the tool bench, she looked out of place, not in the way that screamed money, but in the way that suggested purpose, like she belonged somewhere else yet was entirely intentional about being here. She studied the garage with quiet interest. Rusted license plates lined the far wall. A faded clock ticked lazily above a bulletin board full of service reminders and faded coupons. It was a patchwork of function, memory, and survival. You've kept this place alive, she said, her voice echoing softly through the bay. Luke looked up from under the car. I rent it from the guy who owns the lot. He wanted to tear it down. I offered to make it useful. She knelt beside the Peugeot, not afraid of the grease-streaked floor. That's a habit of yours, isn't it? Fixing things before someone gives up on them. He gave a dry chuckle, brushing a smear of oil from his cheek. You'd be amazed how much in life gets thrown out before it's even broken. She watched him for a moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she stood and walked over to Emma, who sat cross-legged on the pavement, drawing in a sketchbook. What are you working on? Isabel asked gently. Emma looked up. A picture of the car. I've never seen one like it. It's elegant. Isabel smiled genuinely. That's a good word for it. It used to be my father's. Emma tilted her head. Did he love it? Very much. He was a mechanic, too, back in France. Emma lit up. Like my dad. Isabel glanced over at Luke. He was pretending not to listen, but the soft tension in his shoulders gave him away. She crouched beside Emma. I'll tell you a secret. When I was your age, I thought that car was magic. Not because of how fast it went, but because it was the one place my father talked to me like I was an equal. We'd drive for hours, and he'd tell me stories about the engines he fixed and how every machine had a soul. Emma looked up at her like she'd just been handed a treasure. Did he teach you how to fix them too? Isabel laughed, a sound warm, rare, and almost out of practice. Not quite. I was better with words than wrenches. But I listened. Emma nodded seriously. Listening is important. Luke finally stood, wiping his hands. She's right. Most people just wait for their turn to talk. Isabel looked at him. And you? Were you always a mechanic? Luke hesitated, then pulled a rag from his back pocket. No, I was a teacher. High school, French, and literature. She raised her brows like someone confirming a suspicion. So you really do speak it beautifully. He shrugged. Not much demand for Rimbaud in the engine bay. You'd be surprised, she said quietly. Beauty has a way of hiding in places we don't expect. There was a pause. The kind that wasn't awkward but full like the air between two notes in a song. Then Isabel asked, "Why did you stop?" Luke looked at her for a long moment. Then simply, "My wife got sick. I had to be home more." And then she passed. I couldn't go back into a classroom after that. Too many memories. Too many empty chairs. Emma's pencil stopped moving. She didn't look up. She already knew this story by heart. "I'm sorry," Isabel said, her voice low, sincere. "Loss has a way of changing everything, doesn't it?" "Yeah," Luke replied. "And then it changes you." Another pause. Then Isabel shifted. "Would you consider working on another car after this one?" she asked almost carefully. Luke gave her a quizzical look. "What have you got in mind?" "I've got an old Citroën DS in storage," she said casually. "Also belonged to my father. I've been meaning to restore it. Thought maybe it deserved someone who actually respects the craft." He narrowed his eyes. "You're not from around here, are you?" She smiled, enigmatic. "No, I'm just passing through. For now." That was a lie. Or at least not the whole truth. What she didn't say was that she wasn't just Isabel, the curious woman with the nostalgic car. She was Isabel Moreau, CEO of Fontaine Motors, a billion-dollar automotive empire that had forgotten the values her father once held dear. What she didn't say was that she had come here not to fix a car, but to fix herself. Luke handed her a folded note. "It'll take a couple days to do this one right. Peugeot parts aren't exactly stocked at the local hardware store." "I can wait," she replied. "You mean you want to wait?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded. "Sometimes. The waiting is the best part." Emma piped up from the ground. "I think you're interesting." Isabel laughed again. "Why's that? You listen like my dad does. Like, the words matter." Luke met Isabel's gaze. There was something different in her eyes now. Not power, not calculation, but longing. The kind of longing that people wear quietly like old perfume. It had soaked into her bones. "I'll see what I can do with your Peugeot," he said softly. "Merci, Luke," she replied, her French accent returning with delicate precision. And as she turned to leave, Luke caught himself wondering why a woman who spoke like Paris, walked like she owned Wall Street, and yet chose to wait on a greasy garage floor in a nowhere town. He didn't know the answer yet. But neither did she. All either of them knew was this something had shifted. And for the first time in years, neither of them wanted to fix it. The next morning began like any other. Luke rolled open the garage door at 7:02, same as he had every weekday for the last 4 years. The metal screeched slightly in protest. He made a mental note to oil it, though he probably wouldn't. Some things just sounded like life. He had barely laid out his socket wrenches when the Peugeot's engine caught his eye. Not for its design, though it was a marvel of old-world engineering, but for what it represented now: a bridge. A relic. A story that hadn't been told in years. Like his own. He wiped his hands and opened the drawer of an old filing cabinet wedged in the corner of the shop. It groaned as it slid open. In the back beneath, invoices, expired warranty pamphlets, and a wrinkled copy of Auto World lay a single manila envelope. He hadn't touched it in almost 5 years. He pulled it out, the dust of time clinging to the seal. Inside was a proposal, neatly typed, precisely drawn, signed by him. Luke Mitchell Community-Based Modular Engine Efficiency Initiative. The title still sounded too academic, but he had poured everything into it. Charts, calculations, hand-drawn engine redesigns aimed at making fuel-efficient cars more accessible to working-class Americans. He had mailed copies to 5 different manufacturers. Only one had replied: Fontaine Motors. The letter still folded inside was brief, polite, cold. Dear Mr. Mitchell, thank you for your submission. At this time, Fontaine Motors is not seeking external concepts for powertrain development. Best regards, Innovation and Engineering Division. There was no signature, no name, just a department. He remembered holding that letter in his hands, feeling like he was staring into a closed door bolted from the other side. He'd never told Emma, or anyone, because hope is only noble when it doesn't embarrass you. Dad, came her voice from behind. Luke startled. Emma stood in the doorway, half-dressed for school, holding a banana and her sketchbook. What's that? He quickly folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. Just old paperwork. She tilted her head, unconvinced. That looked like an engine drawing. He paused. It was a long time ago. Emma set her banana down carefully on the workbench. Is it something you invented? I tried. It didn't work out. She studied him. Why not? Luke hesitated, then offered the gentlest version of the truth. Because sometimes the people who can make things happen don't believe people like me can come up with good ideas. Emma frowned. But that's dumb. He smiled despite himself. Yeah, it kind of is. She hugged her sketchbook to her chest. Can I see it? He considered it for a moment, then nodded and handed her the envelope. Her eyes widened at the diagrams. This is so cool, Dad. It looks like the inside of a spaceship. He laughed. It's just a 4-cylinder engine with variable compression ratios. To me, she said proudly, it's a spaceship. She flipped to the last page where his signature sat alone under the Fontaine Motors header. Did you really send this to a car company? She asked. I did. What did they say? They said no. Emma's brow furrowed. She stared at the signature again, then at the name on the letterhead. And later that day, long after Luke had gone back to work on the Peugeot, and Isabel had returned to sit quietly in the corner of the garage with her tablet and a cup of coffee, Emma, in her tiny determined way, took the envelope and slipped it into her backpack. She didn't tell her dad. That evening, Isabel stood near the bay window of her Airbnb, still dressed in jeans and a sweater from the garage. A mug of tea sat untouched on the sill. Her tablet lay open, the screen frozen on a news article about Fontaine Motors' recent board restructure. Her own face was in the upper corner, cold, composed, unapproachable. She didn't recognize it. There were no cameras at Crawford Auto Lot, no press, no shareholders, no one asking what she planned to buy, sell, merge, or rebrand. There was only grease-old stories and a man who still looked at cars like they were sacred. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, no one was there, only a small worn envelope resting neatly on the doormat. Inside, the proposal, Luke's name, the Fontaine letter, and a sticky note. My dad made this. He thinks it doesn't matter anymore, but I think you might be the kind of person who knows it still does. Isabel stood frozen for a long moment, heart pounding in a way she didn't expect. She stepped back inside and sat, slowly opening the proposal again. The designs were rudimentary but brilliant. Not groundbreaking in a corporate sense, but honest, intentional human. The kind of solution her father would have loved. The kind of thinking Fontaine Motors hadn't touched in years. A tear slipped down her cheek before she realized it. She wasn't just looking at an engine. She was looking at a man who, despite grief and rejection, still believed in building things that lasted. Just not for himself anymore, for Emma, for people like his wife had been. Isabel closed the folder, set her tea aside, and opened her laptop. To innovationfontainemotors.com. Subject RE Archive Submission L. Mitchell. Requesting immediate access to submission records for community-based efficiency initiatives from 5 years ago. Priority high. She paused. Then typed, also send me the name of whoever issued the rejection response. I'd like to talk to them personally. And just like that, two stories began to unearth themselves, one mechanical, the other personal. One hidden in a drawer, the other buried in a heart too used to disappointment. But both were about to be seen again. And that sometimes is where healing begins. The storm rolled in from the mountains like a brooding animal, slow and heavy. By dusk, the sky had darkened to a dusky bruise, and lightning stitched the horizon with silent flashes. Luke had just finished bolting the garage door shut when the first drops of rain began to fall, fat cold splashes that turned the gravel to mud and painted the concrete slick. He was halfway to his truck when headlights swept across the lot, cutting through the downpour. A car, not just any car, the Peugeot. It shuddered slightly as it pulled up, its old wipers working in desperate rhythmic arcs. The engine sputtered, once coughed, then died completely. Luke blinked. What was Isabel doing? Driving that antique in the middle of a thunderstorm. He jogged over as she stepped out, soaked in seconds, clutching the steering wheel one moment and an umbrella the next. She didn't open it. "Are you out of your mind?" he called through the wind. She laughed, a short, breathless sound. Apparently, Luke opened the passenger door. "Come on, before you catch pneumonia." Inside the garage, the storm raged like a freight train, the metal roof booming with each drop, thunder shaking the beams. Isabel stood dripping near the entrance arms, folded her sweater, clinging to her frame. "The brakes locked halfway down the ridge," she said. Then the lights started flickering. "I thought I could make it here." Luke grabbed a towel from the shelf and handed it to her. "You shouldn't be driving that car at all, not yet. It's not ready." She took the towel without comment, drying her face and hair with slow, methodical movements. He opened the hood of the Peugeot and leaned in. "Water's gotten into the electrical panel. We'll have to wait for it to dry before I can see how bad it is." She nodded. "I didn't know where else to go." The words landed between them like a confession. Luke looked at her, then really looked. Her eyes, always so composed, were glassy now, not from the rain, but from something older, deeper. He stepped away from the car and pulled out two metal folding chairs from the back wall. "Come sit. You look like you've been carrying something heavier than a busted brake line." They sat in the dim light of a single hanging bulb, the storm still moaning beyond the walls. The garage smelled of wet asphalt and something softer, jasmine from her hair maybe. She took a breath. "You were right. I'm not from around here. I figured. I grew up in Paris. My father was a mechanic immigrant from Marseille. He taught me about cars before he taught me about people. Said they were easier to understand." Luke smiled faintly. "He sounds like a smart man." "He was," she said. "He passed when I was 19. Heart failure. I'm sorry." She nodded, her eyes far away. "He left me the Peugeot. I didn't drive it for 10 years. Couldn't. Then one day I realized I couldn't remember the sound of his voice, only the sound of the engine when he drove." She paused, then added, "So I started it again." The storm quieted, as if listening. "I work for the company he once admired," she said. "Fontaine Motors." Luke froze. "I'm not just passing through," she continued. "I came here because I needed to see what the world looks like outside boardrooms and digital dashboards. I needed to know if anyone still thinks the way he did, if anyone still believes machines should serve people, not just profits." Luke's throat tightened. "That's why you brought the Peugeot here." "No," she said. "I brought the Peugeot here because my father believed in fixing things. But I stayed because you do too." He didn't know what to say. For a long moment, the silence between them grew thick with unsaid things. Then she added softer, "Now I read your engine design." Luke stiffened. She looked at him with open honesty. "Your daughter sent it to me." He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Of course she did. I thought she was just a bright, curious kid. But then I saw your name on the blueprint. I checked the archive. Your proposal was dismissed 5 years ago with a generic response. I'm ashamed to say I signed it." Luke turned to her, slowly, stunned. "You what? I didn't read it then. I read it yesterday." and I cried. Because your design wasn't just smart, it was generous. You wanted to build something that helped people live better. It wasn't enough, he said quietly. At least, not back then. No, she corrected. It was enough. The system wasn't. But that can change. Rain hammered harder for a moment, like punctuation. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, voice trembling now. I don't want to run a company that forgets people like you exist. People who create quietly without expecting recognition. I need your help. Luke stared at her, torn between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. You're serious, he said. I am. You want a mechanic who gave up teaching to raise his daughter and hide in a garage to help you change the course of a billion-dollar company. I want you, she said. Not because of your resume, but because you remember what my father taught me. That machines like people only work when we take the time to understand them. Luke felt the edges of his old self stir. The one who used to believe in systems, in schools, in change. The one who used to believe he could matter. A small smile touched his lips. You know this is crazy, right? She smiled back, misty-eyed. So is driving a Peugeot in a thunderstorm to find a stranger with oil on his hands and answers in his heart. They sat there, neither moving, as the storm finally began to ease its fury, replaced by the quiet hush of dripping eaves and distant thunder rolling away. Outside, the sky cracked open with the first hint of moonlight. Inside, two people who had spent too long holding their breath finally began to exhale. And somewhere deep in Luke's chest, something unlocked, not with the wrench of force, but with the grace of being truly seen. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in Luke's bones. By morning, the garage was warm with sunlight slanting through the windows, yet everything felt hushed, like the day had paused to see if he would move. He hadn't slept much. Not after Isabel's offer. Not after watching her walk into the rain-soaked night, her eyes full of conviction and something else he didn't dare name. He stood at his workbench, now holding a coffee cup gone cold, staring at the blueprint Emma had laid out again, his blueprint. The same one he had folded away 5 years ago and told himself to forget. It wasn't that he didn't believe in it. He just didn't believe anyone ever would. That had been safer. Behind him, Emma was humming softly, swinging her legs over the stool beside the workbench, coloring in a crayon sketch of the Citroën DS Isabel had mentioned. She looked up with a grin. I named her Lumi. Lumi, he asked, amused. Short for La Lumière, it means the light, right? He nodded, smiling, despite himself. Good memory. I think she's fast, but also kind. Emma added seriously, holding up her drawing. Like she could win a race, but she'd stop if someone got hurt. Luke blinked, heart catching on something small but sharp. Isabel had said she wanted his help, wanted his design, wanted him. But that world wasn't his. Not anymore. He was a man of socket wrenches, not stage lights. Oil-stained shirts, not press releases. His world was steady because he kept it small. Contained. Safe. Later that afternoon, he heard the familiar hum of tires on gravel, the unmistakable purr of French engineering. He didn't look up until he heard her voice. I didn't want to assume you'd call. Isabel stood in the doorway of the garage wearing jeans, a navy blazer, and a quiet hopefulness that made her seem younger somehow. She wasn't dressed like a CEO today, just a woman with something to offer and something even bigger at stake. Luke set down the carburetor he was cleaning. I thought about it. A lot. And I can't do it. Her face didn't fall, but the light dimmed just a fraction in her eyes. Because of what happened before, no, he said gently. Because of what would happen now. He walked around the workbench, wiping his hands. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I really do. But that's not my world. I don't wear suits. I don't speak in front of crowds. I change spark plugs and balance brake lines and make sure my daughter gets to school with her homework finished. She's proud of you, Isabel said. You know that, right? He smiled, pained. That's why I can't put her through it. I can't chase something again and come up short. There was a beat of silence broken only by the ticking of the garage's old wall clock. You wouldn't be chasing anything, Isabel said at last. You'd be leading. I'm not a leader, he said quieter now. I'm a mechanic. She stepped forward. Then, let me tell you something only a mechanic would understand. The smallest, quietest part in an engine can change how the whole thing runs. It doesn't need to be big. It just needs to work. He looked at her, unsure whether to be grateful or more afraid of how deeply she understood him. I'm not asking you to sell yourself, she said. I'm asking you to stand next to something you already built and just let people see it. He shook his head slowly. It's not that simple. Why not? Because what if I let them see it and it still doesn't matter? That landed. And this time she didn't try to counter it with logic or vision or strategy. She just said, then I'll be the one standing next to you when it doesn't. Those words hit him harder than any rejection letter ever had. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the stillness. Emma. She stood at the entrance to the garage, clutching her drawing like a flag. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright. You have to go. Luke blinked. Emma. No, Dad. You have to. You have to show people your design. You always tell me to try, even if I'm scared. Even when I think it won't work. She crossed the floor, holding out the drawing of Lumiere. You told me we're not what we lose. We're what we build. So, go build something. Luke looked down at the picture. The lines were crooked, the coloring uneven. But it was radiant. Hope in crayon form. He knelt in front of her heart, full to the brim. You believe I can do this? Emma nodded, fierce. I know you can. Isabel said nothing. She didn't need to. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and he could tell this moment this was why she'd come. Not for the blueprint, not for the brand, but for this to witness a man rediscover his own voice, spoken not in French, not in engineering jargon, but in the language of a father who wanted to show his daughter what it looked like to believe in yourself again. Luke stood slowly, breath steady now. He looked at Isabel. I'll need a clean shirt, he said. She grinned. We can find you one. And a haircut. Definitely. He exhaled, still unsure, but no longer afraid. I'll go, he said. But not because I'm trying to be someone else. Good, Isabel whispered. Because I didn't fall for someone else. There it was, accidental, unexpected, irretrievable. Luke's eyes widened slightly. But Isabel didn't flinch. Neither did Emma. And for the first time in a long, long time, Luke Mitchell stepped toward something uncertain, not with caution, but with conviction. He didn't know what the stage would look like, but he knew what he stood for. And this time, he wouldn't hide. The Fontaine Motors Tech Expo was held at a converted train depot in downtown Denver, vaulted steel beams, skylights that poured light like theater spotlights, and a buzzing energy that hummed beneath every polished surface. Executives mingled in tailored suits, engineers hovered near prototypes, and PR assistants fluttered like moths with Bluetooth earpieces. Luke stood outside the glass doors, adjusting the stiff collar of a white dress shirt Isabel had helped him pick out just that morning. His boots were polished, but still boots he'd refused to wear anything that didn't feel like his own skin. His palms were slick with nerves. Beside him, Emma straightened the lapels of his coat with both hands like she'd seen in some movie. You look like someone who knows things, she declared proudly. I'm someone who knows things, he said with a nervous smile. Isabel joined them, stepping out from the shadows of the entryway. She wore a charcoal gray suit, understated but sharp, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek twist. The woman before him looked like a CEO again, poised, deliberate, powerful, but her eyes softened when she looked at Luke. They're ready, she said gently. I'm not, he replied. Doesn't matter. Come anyway. Inside, the crowd parted as Isabel led them toward the central presentation stage. Whispers followed them about her mostly. Isabel Moreau hadn't been seen in public for months, and now she was showing up at her company's own event with a mechanic and a little girl. The PR team rushed to her side. One young assistant leaned in. Do you want us to announce Mr. Mitchell's credentials? Isabel shook her head. No, He'll speak for himself." Luke turned to Emma. "You okay?" She gave him a confident thumbs up. "I got this. You're not the one going on stage. I still got this." Luke's throat tightened. They stepped up together. The room went still. Isabel took the microphone first. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "You expected to hear from my engineers, my designers, my analysts. Instead, I'd like you to hear from someone who until last week didn't even own a suit jacket." Polite laughter. She glanced at Luke. "But he does own something more valuable, an idea, a vision, and a reason that's far too rare in this industry, people first." She turned to him, offering the mic. Luke stepped forward. For a moment, he said nothing. Just let the silence hold. Then, slowly, he began. "My name is Luke Mitchell. I used to be a teacher. I'm a single dad. I've worked out of a garage behind a used car lot for the last 4 years, and I'm standing here because I once mailed a blueprint to this company. They rejected it." A shift in the audience. I wasn't surprised, he continued, because when someone from a place like mine sends something to a place like this, it usually ends up in a pile marked not applicable. But that blueprint wasn't just an engine. It was a way to give more people a chance to drive safer, more efficient cars without going broke. He paused. "I didn't come here to sell anything. I came here because I believe we've gotten too comfortable designing for profit, not for purpose. And someone in this room, someone with power, read my design and said, 'We need this.'" He turned to Isabel. "And she didn't just say it, she meant it." Murmurs rippled, some skeptical, some curious. "I'm not an executive," Luke said, "but I know how to build. And I know what it's like to raise a daughter and wonder if the world will give her a fair chance. This design wasn't just for me. It was for her. And for families like ours." Emma, sitting in the front row, smiled wide. Luke finished. "You don't need a degree from MIT to care. You just need to believe that machines and companies should serve people, not the other way around." Applause started slowly, then built, then roared. Luke stepped back, heart-pounding. Isabel returned to the mic. Her voice was cool but resonant. "You've just met the mind behind what we're calling Project Lumiere, a car inspired not by market trend, but by real-life need." She clicked a remote. A projection of Luke's blueprint filled the screen behind her, annotated with overlays. A minimalist, fuel-efficient engine. A modular design to reduce maintenance costs. Sustainable materials. Clean, accessible, intentional. The audience stilled again. And then someone near the front raised a hand. A woman in a burgundy blazer. She spoke clearly. Who signed the original rejection letter, A. Hush. Luke turned to Isabel. His chest tightened. He knew the answer. He'd read it in her eyes back in the garage before she ever confessed. Isabel walked to center stage, and for the first time since assuming the CEO role, she did not hide behind numbers titles or perfect posture. She looked straight into the crowd. "I did," she said simply. Gasps. Whispers. "I signed that rejection," she repeated, without reading it, "because I trusted a system that prioritized speed and scale over substance. I trusted convenience. I failed." She paused. "And I won't do that again." Someone in the back clapped. Then someone else. And then more. Not just polite, but affirming. Believing. Luke glanced at her. She was no longer hiding. Neither was he. That night, as the sun set behind the Denver skyline, the three of them stood on the rooftop of the venue watching the city flicker to life below. Emma leaned against the railing, still wearing her event badge like it was a trophy. Luke sipped from a plastic cup of lukewarm coffee. That went better than expected. Isabel smiled. It went the only way it could with the truth. He looked at her. "You didn't have to say it was you." "I did," she said, "because we don't build trust by being clever. We build it by being honest." Luke was quiet for a long beat. "Then, what happens now?" She turned to face him fully. "Now we build something better." He looked out over the city lights. and for the first time in years he saw the road ahead not as a path he missed, but as one he was finally meant to walk. The next morning, Luke woke up before the sun. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds meaning, not silence, but stillness. Emma was still asleep down the hall, her sketchbook on the floor, her glasses askew on the nightstand. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house save for Luke's steady breath as he stood in the kitchen staring at the blueprint spread out on the table. It looked different now. Not physically same paper, same lines, but emotionally. Once it had been a symbol of rejection, then regret. Now, somehow it felt like hope. He traced the corner of the page where Emma's handwriting still clung to the sticky note she'd attached when she secretly sent it to Isabel. "My dad made this. Please read it with your heart." Luke didn't know what part hit him harder, the faith in her words, or the belief that someone would read it with something more than profit in mind. And someone had. He folded the blueprint carefully and slid it into the envelope, ready for its next life. That same morning across town, Isabel sat in a glass-walled corner office, no longer hiding behind it, but using it, owning it. Sunlight poured through the windows, bouncing off the chrome edges of her desk and the tablet in her hand. She tapped the screen, watching the latest investor reactions roll in from the night before. Media outlets were buzzing about Project Lumiere, but Isabel wasn't looking at headlines. She was watching the replay. Luke on stage, his voice steady, eyes wide, heart open. Emma smiling in the front row. Herself standing beside them, not as an executive trying to save face, but as a woman finally showing hers. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant, Margot, poked her head in. The board's on standby for the 10 a.m. call. "Give me 5, Isabel said, and closed the door. Margot nodded, hesitating slightly. "For what it's worth, Isabel, that was the best thing this company has done in years." Isabel offered a soft smile. "Thank you." As the door clicked shut, she turned to the folder sitting on her desk. It wasn't digital. It was the physical copy Emma had brought, the original creased and signed. It still smelled faintly of oil and pencil graphite. She opened it one more time and whispered, "Let's see if the world is finally ready." That evening, Luke pulled into the lot behind his garage to find something waiting for him. A crate. No return address. Curious, he pried it open and found parts. Custom machined. Lightweight, high-efficiency components. Engine prototypes. Exact specs based on his design, but enhanced, engineered with real capital. Tucked into the box was a note. "Phase 1 is ready. Let's build it together." He exhaled, slowly, brushing his thumb across the metal. It was real now. Not an idea. Not a blueprint. Steel and vision. He looked over his shoulder as Emma came jogging up on her bike. "What's that?" she asked. Luke smiled, heart warm. "It's the beginning." She parked her bike and peered into the crate, her eyes lighting up. "It's yours, isn't it?" He nodded. "Ours." She grinned. "So, are you going to name it Lumi?" He chuckled. "I think that name's taken." Days later, Luke and Isabel stood shoulder to shoulder in a small lab just off Fontaine's Denver campus, a room she had repurposed for the pilot project. Gone were the polished marble floors and LED panels of the main facility. This room smelled like coffee sawdust and sparked a place where things were meant to be made, not marketed. Luke rolled up his sleeves. Isabel wore her hair loose, no blazer, no heels. A team of engineers, many younger than him, waited with curiosity and quiet respect as he unpacked the components. Isabel introduced him without pretense. "This is Luke Mitchell. You've read his designs. Now he's here to help us build them." There were no questions, no snickers, just nods, maybe even reverence. Later, over lunch, Luke found himself sitting beside a young engineer named Karina, who'd worked at Fontaine for 2 years. She was flipping through his blueprint, making notes, asking about torque ratios. "This part here," she said, tapping a corner of the schematic, "was the first time I felt like someone actually considered the mechanic who has to fix the car later." You didn't just think about how to build it, you thought about how to keep it alive. Luke blinked, moved. No one's ever said that before. She smiled. That's because no one's ever done it like this before. That night, Isabel and Luke returned to the garage where it all began. Emma was already inside hanging fairy lights she'd found in a thrift store bin. Ambiance, she declared. Luke leaned against the doorframe. Is that a thing? Now Emma smirked. It is, if you want people to take your engine seriously. Inside, the Peugeot gleamed beneath the soft lights. Restored now. Whole. A tribute not just to a man's legacy, but to what happens when stories are kept alive rather than shut away in drawers. Isabel ran her hand along the hood. My father would have loved this. Luke looked at her quieter now. Do you think he'd be proud? She met his gaze. Of you? Absolutely. A beat passed. Then Isabel said more softly, Of me? Luke didn't answer with words. He just took her hand. And in that quiet, flickering garage surrounded by fairy lights, old steel, and new dreams, two people who had spent too long chasing purpose finally stood still in it. Outside, the night settled warm and easy, and beneath that humble roof something extraordinary was taking root. Not just an engine, but a life reimagined. The late spring sky stretched wide over Colorado, painted with long strokes of indigo and deep gold. Evening had settled in slow and soft, and the lights of Fontaine Motors' pilot workshop blinked on like cautious stars. Inside, Luke stood by the test bench staring at the prototype engine as if it were breathing. It wasn't just steel and circuitry anymore. It was his. Built from the design he once buried, assembled by a team that listened, and now fully functional, ready for the first road test tomorrow. He should have been proud. He should have felt invincible. But all he could feel was something unfinished. The blueprint had been seen. The engine had come alive. But Luke hadn't gone home. Not really. The garage behind Crawford Auto Lot had sat empty for 2 days now. Dust had begun to settle again where Emma's crayons once rolled, and the old wall clock ticked just slightly off time as if waiting. Isabel knew it was foolish to come back this late. But she did. She parked her car quietly, no Peugeot this time, just a rental forgettable. She walked to the side door of the garage, her heels clicking against the cracked concrete. It wasn't locked. Inside, it smelled like oil and memory. And in the corner, almost as if he'd never left, stood Luke. Backlit by the glow of an overhead lamp, sleeves rolled, arms crossed. The engine sat in front of him. But he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at the photo taped to the side of his toolbox. A picture of Emma, maybe 7 years old, holding a tiny wrench and beaming. Isabel didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He turned slowly as if he'd been expecting her. Maybe he had. What are you doing here? He asked. I should be asking you that, she replied, stepping in. He nodded toward the engine. It didn't sound right at high RPM, nothing major, just needed space to think it through. She crossed her arms, mirroring him. So you drove 2 hours to stand in the past. He smirked, faint. The past is the only place quiet enough to think. She moved closer. And what did you think about? He hesitated. Then, whether I belong where I'm going, or if I just got lucky stumbling in. Isabel exhaled. You didn't stumble, Luke. You walked in. You just didn't realize the ground was yours to begin with. He leaned against the wall, arms hanging loose now. Everyone at Fontaine respects me. But that kind of respect, it's fragile. One mistake, one slip, and I become the mechanic experiment again. You're more than that. I know that, he said quickly, then softer, but knowing doesn't always silence the echo of being underestimated. Isabel stepped closer, her voice steady. Then, let me say it again, louder than that echo. You do belong. Not because you've earned it, not because you fixed a car or delivered a speech, but because you never stopped building, even when no one watched. Luke looked down, silent. She added, and Emma, she sees it. She doesn't admire you because you're on a stage. She admires you because you didn't let disappointment end your story." He met her eyes. "And you? What do you see?" She didn't blink. "I see the man who reminded me why my father fell in love with engines. Why I did too." He swallowed hard. "You say things like that and then expect me to go back to being professional." She stepped into his space, smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Maybe I don't want professional anymore." Their breath met in the middle, but instead of a kiss, she did something else. She handed him a folder. Thick, heavy. "What's this?" he asked. "Final board approval. Full green light for Project Lumiere's first production run. You're officially named co-lead designer." His eyebrows lifted. "You pulled that off in 2 days." She grinned. "You're not the only one who works late." He flipped the folder open and stopped. His name. Printed. Bold. Real. Not scribbled on a blueprint. Not in Emma's handwriting, but official. He looked up. "I don't know what to say." "Then say yes," she said. "Say you'll finish what you started." He looked around the garage. At the cracked floor, the coffee-stained rags, the clock that never ran on time. The ghosts of the man he used to be. Then he looked at her, at the woman who saw not just what he built, but why he built it. He closed the folder and smiled. "All right," he said. "Let's build a future that doesn't forget where it came from." Isabel took a breath as if letting go of years she didn't know she'd carried. "One condition." He tilted his head. "Yeah, you let Emma name the first model." Luke laughed. "She already has. Lumiere." "Well," Isabel said, brushing a hair from her face, "then I suppose we better make sure it shines." He looked around the room once more, then reached up and shut off the lamp. Together they stepped into the night, not as inventor and executive, not as project leads, but as two people who had finally stopped running from the lives they thought they couldn't have and were now, quietly, fearlessly, claiming them. They gathered just before dawn. The test track outside Fontaine Motors Design Campus stretched wide and empty, slick with morning dew. Floodlights bathed the curved asphalt in silver-blue light while the wind carried the clean scent of spring. Luke stood at the far end of the track beside the car. His car, no theirs. It sat like a sculpture in the pre-dawn quiet, low to the ground, its matte silver body catching the first hints of day. The grille had been subtly reimagined to resemble a smile. Not aggressive, not flashy, just honest. Beneath the hood, Luke's engine, the modular, efficient, serviceable design he once thought would never matter, waited. And stenciled across the tail in elegant script was the name Lumiere. The name Emma had given it in crayon. The name the board had approved unanimously. The name that meant light in both French and the heart. Behind Luke engineers, adjusted equipment cameras rolled and reporters scribbled. There would be an official press release later, of course. But this moment wasn't for them. This was for something else entirely. Emma raced up in her oversized Fontaine windbreaker, her pigtails bouncing. "You're driving it, right?" Luke chuckled. "I wasn't planning to." "You have to," she insisted. "You made it." He raised an eyebrow. "You mean, we made it?" She beamed, then reached into her backpack and pulled something out. A tiny, folded piece of paper. "What's that?" She handed it to him. "It's the last page of your blueprint. You never finished it." "So I did." He opened it. In her neat block lettering it read, "Final note. This design is built not for profit, but for people. For the moms who work 2 jobs. The dads who teach their daughters how to drive. The families who need to go somewhere better. This engine is for them. And also for my dad, who never stopped building, even when no one believed." Emma Mitchell, age 9, 3 to 4. Luke felt something catch in his chest. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing her words in like medicine. Then he looked up to see Isabel walking toward them, clipboard in hand, her usual suit replaced with jeans and a leather jacket. She stopped in front of him, a smile tugging at her lips. "You ready? I don't think I've ever been," he admitted. "But I'm still here. That's what matters." A few feet away, the PR coordinator called out, "Test run in 3 minutes." Luke turned to Isabel. "Are you really letting me drive it first?" "Of course," she said. "It was born with your hands." He glanced at the small crowd gathered at the edge of the track. Engineers, managers, board members, even a few early arriving interns. Not one of them doubted him now. Not after the presentation. Not after the build. And not after they'd seen how he led, not with ego, but with empathy. Luke opened the driver's door and slid in. The interior was clean and intuitive, designed with accessibility in mind, every knob and button in easy reach. Just as he'd imagined. A car for real life, not showroom fantasy. He placed Emma's page gently in the glove box. A quiet promise. Then, with a deep breath, he turned the key. The engine roared to life, not loud, but confident. Responsive. Alive. Cheers rippled across the track. Luke caught Isabel's eye through the windshield. She gave a single nod. Go. He eased the car forward. It glided down the track like it had always belonged there. The morning light chased it, catching on the curves of its body, painting it gold. At 40 miles per hour, Luke felt it settle, quiet, graceful. At 60, it held steady like a hawk on wind. And at 75, it flew. Tears blurred his vision. Not from speed, but from the way it felt to move again, to chase something. To know that something he built not just with tools but with heart could carry people forward, could mean something. When he finished the lap and brought Lumiere back to a stop, the crowd burst into applause. Emma ran to meet him, arms outstretched. He scooped her into a hug before even stepping out. "You went so fast," she exclaimed. "I think I broke the speed of doubt," he said. Isabel stepped forward, clipboard forgotten. "You looked like you belonged there." "I did," he said, "and so does she." He nodded toward the car. "She's ready." Isabel smiled. "Then, so are we." Luke looked around the track, the people, the car, and then finally at Isabel. "You didn't just help me build this," he said. "You rebuilt me." Her eyes softened. "You did that yourself. I just reminded you where the switch was." The wind picked up slightly. The sun crested the edge of the sky, flooding the track in light. Emma leaned against the car, arms crossed like she was already the spokesperson. "Can I tell people I helped design it?" Luke nodded solemnly. "You named it. That's the most important part." And in that moment, surrounded by steel and sunlight, the three of them stood not as CEO, mechanic, or child, but as architects of something far more rare than a revolutionary engine. They had built trust, belief, and a future lit by something more than headlights, lit by light born of love, perseverance, and purpose. La Lumiere wasn't just a car, it was proof that even the humblest dream, when believed in enough, can change the way the world moves. 3 months later, the ribbon fluttered in the soft Colorado breeze, tied across the double doors of a freshly painted workshop just off the main road in Buena Vista. It wasn't flashy. There were no cameras, no press. But for Luke Mitchell, it was the most important place he'd ever opened a door to. The building used to be a tractor repair shop, long abandoned. The roof still carried dents from a hailstorm in 2009, and the paint on the sidewall bore the faint outline of someone else's dream. But inside, everything had been transformed. Workbenches lined the walls, stocked with tools that shined with possibility. In the corner, a small lounge with mismatched chairs and donated books gave the space warmth. And at the heart of it all, 4 stations each fitted with a half-built engine and a stack of blueprints. Not Fontaine's engines. These were simpler, built for learning, for teaching. A hand-lettered wooden sign above the entrance read, "The Workshop for Hope," where hands mend machines and hearts. Luke stood by the door holding a pair of scissors far fancier than he'd ever needed. Next to him, Isabel wore jeans and a light cardigan, her heels replaced with sneakers that Emma had picked out for her. "This is yours," Isabel said, voice low. He shook his head gently. Ours. Behind them, a small group had gathered. Not investors, not dignitaries, just people. Single dads, refugees, young adults aging out of foster care, a retired mechanic who hadn't held a wrench in 10 years, a mother of 3 looking to learn a skill that paid more than minimum wage, a teenage girl who once fixed a lawnmower and never stopped wondering if she could fix something bigger. All invited, all believed in. Emma clutched her clipboard like a mission commander. "You ready?" Luke smiled. "Let's do this." With a simple snip, the ribbon fell. Applause rose like sunlight. Inside, the group filed in with quiet awe, fingers brushing over tools, eyes wide at the engines. There were no desks, no lectures, just hands-on work. Real work. The kind that builds dignity along with skills. Luke walked through the room watching his guests explore. He stopped beside a young man in his 20s, broad shoulders, a nervous look in his eyes. "You ever work on an engine before?" Luke asked. The man shook his head. "Not unless a lawn trimmer counts." "It does," Luke said. "We all start somewhere." He picked up a wrench and handed it to him. "Here. Feel that it's not just weight. It's trust. It says, you can do this." The man nodded slowly. Then he smiled. Across the room, Emma gave an enthusiastic thumbs up from where she was showing someone the safety cabinet. Isabel leaned beside Luke. "You've created something beautiful." "It's not just mine," he said. "You gave it a name." She glanced up at the sign. "I remember when you didn't even want a spotlight." "I still don't," he said. "But I'm learning there's a difference between hiding and honoring what matters." She looked at him. "And what matters most?" Luke turned to her fully, no hesitation this time. "You. Her. This." She smiled. "Good answer." He laughed softly, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "What's that?" she asked. "I found it in the old toolbox," he said. "It was meant for the version of me that never quit. Figured he finally showed up." He handed it to her. She opened it slowly. Inside was the original sticky note Emma had written months ago before any of this had begun. "My dad made this. Please read it with your heart." Isabel touched the paper like it was holy. She knew she whispered. "She always did," Luke said. "She just waited for the rest of us to catch up." They stood there for a long moment, hands brushing hearts full. Then Emma appeared between them, eyes sparkling. "Okay, team. I've got name tags for everyone, even the grown-ups." She handed Luke one that read, "Luke Head Mechanic and Hope Builder, and Isabel CEO Co-Everything Officer." Luke laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. "She's going to run the whole operation by age 10. Isabel slipped an arm around Emma's shoulders. "I'll happily be her assistant." They stepped back into the space, the hum of tools starting to rise, the first spark, the first lesson, the first step in dozens of new journeys. The first morning of many. And just before the sun fully climbed over the mountains, Luke reached over and flipped on the workshop's sign. The bulbs flickered once, then glowed warm. La Lumière. Not just a car, now a movement, a life, a love, a legacy. And for the first time in his life, Luke Mitchell didn't feel like he'd come full circle. He felt like he'd finally arrived, right where the light had always been leading. Home. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know what part of this story spoke to your heart. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories, just like this, crafted to uplift, move, and remind us all of the quiet power of kindness. Thank you so much for watching. We're truly grateful to share these moments with you. See you in the next one.